Welcome to another episode of Ask GameSpot, the show where you ask and we answer. I'm Maxwell McGee, and today's episode is all about Dark Souls 2. Now, this is a game I don't really know a whole... Oh! Alright, Kevin, so our first question comes from Felzano777, who wants to know, is Dark Souls 2 going to be more open world than, say, the previous game, Dark Souls 1?
As a matter of fact, the answer is yes.
Alright.
So the way it's going to work is, of course, Dark Souls was heavily gated in the way of a Zelda game.
Yes.
You know, you defeated certain bosses or you performed certain actions, and then you were able to continue through to a new area. The areas are going to be much more open to you in Dark Souls 2. So, in fact, we're told that you could potentially go to places that would be considered like halfway through the game in terms of its sense of, you know, level progression.
So can you sort of find yourself going up against enemies that are maybe a little bit out of your league?
You could, but as a Dark Souls player can tell you, you could potentially just strip down, not level up, and still manage to get way through Dark Souls. So I'm guessing that it'll probably be the same way in Dark Souls 2. But yes, more open. If you play the beta like I did, you're probably not going to get a real sense of that structure. So don't go into it thinking you've got this open area if you're going to play the beta. But the full game, yes, there's definitely a lot more openness there to look forward to.
All right, Kevin, so Werecaft has a bit of a long question, but the long and short of it is, this person's interested in playing Dark Souls, but he's not interested in playing with a bunch of other random people. Is the game, can you sort of be competent at it if you're just playing solo?
All right, so there's a lot going on in that question, believe it or not. The answer, the straight up answer is yes, you can play Dark Souls 2 on your own without having to worry about all of the other people that are also playing it and so on and so forth. So if you don't like playing with random strangers, you can turn that off and ignore it. But if I can speak personally for a moment and sort of editorialize on this for a moment, you're sort of missing the point, I think, if you play offline. And I also think there's a danger in thinking that other players are somehow a bad thing in this case because they're strangers. You're always going to be playing with strangers when you play Dark Souls. That's just the way the game is set up. All these worlds are interconnected. You see the ghosts. You know, you get to play co-op with people. The community is, in a sense, the way it works is everybody's sort of out for each other. You're watching each other's backs. So, you know, I want to say, hey, you know, yes, you can play it alone, but I feel like you're a little bit missing the point if you do, because you're missing that sense of camaraderie, that sense of, hey, we're in this together and responsible for each other, you know, that you get in Dark Souls. So,
I mean, when you're playing cooperatively with another player, are you like running around as a group, like you're all in a party together? Or is it a little more abstract?
It does sort of work like a party system. However, you're not tied to being with each other. You can go off anywhere you want. And of course, when you are online, you do potentially get invaded by another player. So again, you can rip that internet cord right out of your console if you want to and play. But you know, I feel like you're missing some of what makes the series so special in doing so. So, you know, try it out, and if you don't like having other people, you know, potentially involved in your progress, then just continue along without that particular option. You can do that.
All right, Kevin, I'm going to cut to the punchline of Zarage's question here.
Okay.
Basically, monsters can invade your game now?
Yeah, Zaraj was pointing out a part, I wrote a piece, and I had some footage that I took while I played the game, and in there, me and my co-op partner, we encountered 2 black phantoms. So
otherwise known as red phantoms.
Yes, so black phantoms actually glow red instead of actually being black. But I think our friend here actually missed that in Dark Souls that also happened. You could be invaded not just by other players who appear in your world as Black Phantoms, but you can actually be invaded by Black Phantom NPCs. However, it's a little bit different in Dark Souls 2 now. So in Dark Souls, you couldn't be hollowed when you were invaded, and you had to have, you can't have beaten the boss yet. Now, in Dark Souls 2, you don't have to be fully human. And be invaded. You can still be in various states of being hollowed.
So you can't just use hollowedness as a safeguard now against invasion.
Exactly, and I think part of that's meant to sort of offset other things about the game that might be making it easier in certain ways. You've got this other element that actually adds a little bit more suspense and challenge.
And that actually leads us to our next question, Kevin, from Superior Logic, who wants to know, is the game easier? Harder?
So, I'm just going to talk about my own experience with the beta, and I don't want this to sound as though this is a be-all, end-all, because my experience is limited to just this one thing. However, I will say that there were elements about it that made it seem definitely a little bit easier.
Okay.
So there are now items that you can pick up and called life gems now, and in the beta at least, enemies dropped all sorts of these life gems. I actually had over 24 life gems at some point. And the way they work is that when you use one, your health starts to gradually build up, but your movement speed slows down at the same time. So it's not something that you're going to do in the middle of battle typically. When you're in battle, you still have the Estus flasks that Dark Souls had, so which are like potions if you haven't played Dark Souls. So you still have the Estus flasks, and they still fill up when you go to a bonfire, but you also have these life gems, and there are lots of life gems that were scattered around the beta. So in general, I felt like the game was a little bit easier than Dark Souls, but I don't want that to sound like the final expert opinion on Dark Souls 2 overall, because I just don't know. But based on the beta, perhaps Dark Souls 2 will be a little bit easier. I don't know. All right, so last question. Naruto fan 420XX. There's nothing here from Naruto fan. So I guess that brings us to a close. If you have questions, obviously, about different games, let us know. Put it on our Facebook, ask us on Twitter, put them in the bottom of the comments and say, hey, I'm interested in this game, I have some questions. What do you got to tell us? And in the... Where's Maxwell?